Yes, it's often a problem that landlords encounter where tenants have simply disappeared from their property and they're not 100% sure if the tenant's stayed or gone. There might be some rent arrears, or even more perversely, they might in fact still be paying the rent, often by standing order, and you're not clear why they're doing this, and no one's really sure what's going on. So the first thing to do is inspect the property. You need to give at least 24 hours notice in writing of an intention to inspect, so a letter posted to the property. I prefer to post them in case there's a mail redirection set up. I would probably back that up with a bit of an email, text message, mobile phone call, so a sort of every method of communication type effect. And then go and visit the property and see what you see. I would start by taking a look at the rubbish situation. If there's huge piles of rubbish left there, then the chances are they've dumped it all. I would tend to read the meters, because if you read them twice a week apart, it will tell you whether someone's been there when you weren't there using gas and electricity. Look through the windows, look through the letterbox, lots of doorbell, lots of knocking and banging. So take a tip from all those exciting police programs when they go to people's doors. You need to avoid just like sidling on in and then finding someone else. You need to make very clear that you're coming in, but try and do it in a relatively non-confrontational way. So lots of aspects saying we haven't heard from you, we were worried about your safety is your line of approach, more than why haven't you paid my rent and want my property back? Damn it! Even though that might be what you might be thinking a little bit. So lots of banging, lots of knocking. Try and use your own management keys to effect entry. If the locks have been changed and they won't work, you've got a bit of a problem, and realistically you probably need to start thinking seriously about going to court for possession in that situation. If you can get in, then take a good look around. I would start by looking at the post. That doesn't mean opening the post, that is illegal, but you can look at the outside of people's post. If all the post has got like weird red envelopes and the words final notice on it, then that's pretty indicative someone's gone. If there are lots of handwritten letters and cards and things like that, then that's indicative the person's still there, because that would tend to have been moved. So I would tend to pick the post up, put it in a pile, and put it somewhere obvious but not in the big pile behind the front door. So I would put it on a kitchen counter. You're not required to do a James Bond trick and like put talcum powder around it or put a line down it or anything like that, but put it somewhere clearly obvious but separate. Then good look around the property. You can take photos as long as they're not interfering with people's privacy, so general aspect shots are fine. But obviously if you go and open up their underwear drawer and take pictures of the inside, that is A, weird, and B, illegal. I have encountered the odd case here and there, so best not to go down that road. So you can take some pictures, just general mobile phone pictures, something like that, very helpful in these situations. Take a look at what's there. Now, a lot of people get very excited and say, oh, the tenant's left stuff, therefore they must still be there, without thinking about what it is. A lot of people in rental property abandon a lot of stuff these days. It's partly a reflection of a sort of more consumerist society. So I don't get very interested in people saying, oh, there's clothes there, and I never get interested in what's in the fridge. Much more interested in personal effects. So if, for example, there's a photo album entitled My Wedding, it's pretty likely the person's still there, or they've had a very bad breakup and no one wanted the wedding album. But it's looking for those kind of personal things, photographs of grandchildren. I always look in bathrooms. I think people's personal effects, like their toothbrushes and their makeup and their personal supplies, far more likely to have moved. At the end of the day, think about it. If you had to go now and move into a hotel, what stuff would you be taking? You're not worried about whether you've got all your underpants, you'll take enough, but you'll certainly take your toothbrush. You're not going to worry about your fridge, but if your house is going to be damaged, you might grab that really important picture of your wedding. So it's looking for those things that are always going to go, as against obsessing about those things that tend to get left behind. So I'd be looking for evidence of things that should be there that aren't. Then realistically you need to go and give it a week or so and go and visit again and be looking for changes, which is why you would have taken pictures and why you would have put the post on one side. If all of that hasn't changed and the meter readings haven't changed, it's pretty indicative that the property has been empty or not used for the entire period you've not between your last visit and your next visit. In which case I would be assuming the tenant's probably abandoned. Unfortunately, the government is supposed to have introduced a new abandonment process in the Housing and Local Planning Act, but it's still not in force, so we're still waiting for that. But you are always entitled to take back possession of abandoned properties if you reasonably believe that they are abandoned. So if you've done a couple of visits and you're not hearing anything, I would then write a letter to the property, both by post and putting it through the door, and emailing to all known addresses, and text messages and phone messages again, saying that you believe the property's been abandoned, giving the tenant at least 2 weeks, possibly a bit longer, preferably a bit longer, to get in touch. Otherwise you'll take back possession, and at the end of that time period I would look to take back possession of the property. So it's common that tenants will leave something behind when they depart a property. That might range from a bit of rubbish to 1 or 2 items of clothing to literally the entire house. Landlords have obligations in respect of abandoned property. They're very old obligations, and they're contained in something called the Torts Interference with Goods Act, which covers lots of other situations where stuff is accidentally abandoned. And in fact, it also covers situations where, for example, you get a delivery to your house that you didn't ask for. But the essential point is that the landlord is what's called an involuntary bailee of goods, without getting into the detail of the law. And they have to give reasonable notice of their intentions to do something with the property, and then they can do what they want with it within practice. So if a tenant's abandoned the property, the first thing you should do is get a quick inventory of what's there. That doesn't necessarily mean an exhaustive listing. My preferred method these days actually is to just lay it all out and video it or take pictures of it. Because if you do start throwing stuff away, the big danger is the tenant comes back later and claims you've thrown away something valuable. And in that case, all the suitcases will be very expensive Gucci suitcases, and they will all be stuffed with cash and or jewellery. So it's very important to have a rough piece of evidence of what there actually was. You have to store the property securely. It doesn't have to be left in the premises. You can put it somewhere else. But what you can't do is stick it in your damp, mouldy basement and watch it all get destroyed. So you have to store it in a reasonably secure manner. The cost of that can, in theory, be recovered from the tenant, but it can be sometimes hard to actually do that in practice. You should then notify the tenant that you've got the items, an email, a text message, any of these things, and say if you don't hear from them within a reasonable period, they will be destroyed. Now, ideally, a really good tenancy agreement should cover this issue for you, because it will normally say that anything that's abandoned the property and not collected within a set period of time, usually around 14 or 28 days, will be destroyed. If you've given that notification and you've kept the stuff for a reasonable period of time and you've not heard from anybody, then at the end of it you can either sell the stuff if you can find anyone to buy it, often quite difficult, or you can simply bin it. If you keep it and use it, or you sell it for money, you must credit the tenant with the money. Now obviously you can offset that against storage costs, but if you got a lot of money from selling these things and the tenant reappeared within a period of time, up to 6 years, you would have to give them the money back. So you should be quite cautious before you think you've had some massive windfall in selling off all the jewellery you've found, for example. And if it was a high value item, I would strongly advise keeping it. Those things taken into account, that's most of the issues dealt with. The only other thing that is worth bearing in mind is if you take control of the property that is not the occupier's and sell it, then you're liable for double its value. And the classic problem there is items on hire purchase. So high value electrical goods like televisions and so on, I would take a very close look at. If they've come from a hire purchase arrangement, they will almost always have some sort of plastic plate bonded to them telling you who they're hired from, and I would contact that hire purchase company and ask them to take away their goods. If there's a lot of rubbish, and if things are obviously rubbish, then they could be treated as rubbish, but you should always be a little bit careful about what you choose to treat as rubbish. If something's clearly perishable and disintegrating or hazardous, or has absolutely no obvious value, it can be disposed of. But be careful. I remember dealing with a case where a tenant was unlawfully evicted and the landlord treated as rubbish all of the photographs of his dead fiancée, which were irreplaceable, and the landlord had thrown them all away. They were irrecoverable and ended up paying a lot of money in damages. So what's your rubbish may in fact be poorly stored, but personally valuable or irreplaceable items. So just as with storage costs, the cost of disposing of rubbish is theoretically recoverable from the tenant as well, but in practice unless you're taking out a deposit, it's really difficult to get this money in the end.